I was at my son Razvan's second wedding, surrounded by 1,000 white roses, when my 7-year-old grandson, Tiran, tugged my hand and whispered a sentence that made my blood run cold. "Grandma, look under the table." I bent down, just enough to lift the linen, and what I saw wasn't dirt or a dropped toy. It was a folded scrap of paper, and the 4 hastily scrawled words I read on it were an instruction, clear as a bell, to severely harm my grandson on his father's happiest day. I froze, the ballroom fading into a blur, suddenly realizing the beautiful bride, Lizzie, was not just replacing Tiran's mother, but was a predator who had just set a trap right at our feet. Pause the noise for a second. That knot in your stomach? That's the feeling of a mother fighting for survival. If you felt that fear, hit the like button and tell me where you're listening from. Your comments let us know how far the truth has traveled. My chest felt crushed, compressed by the weight of a granite block. The laughter of the nearby guests, the clinking of their wine glasses, it was all a mocking, hollow echo. I squeezed Tiran closer, his small body a precious, fragile weight in my embrace. His fear was real, the kind that burns a hole in a child's soul. He knew something was wrong, something I, in my desperate hope for my son's happiness, had chosen to ignore. How could I have been so blind? I had seen the signs, the coldness in Lizzie's eyes when she looked at Tiran, the subtle harshness in her voice. I had rationalized it all, telling myself a young woman couldn't immediately love a grieving child. But this was not indifference. This was malice. A deliberate, calculated act of extreme cruelty disguised beneath the veil of a celebratory request. This wasn't just betrayal to Tiran. It was a violation of the sacred, trusting memory of his mother, Mirella, whose absence still felt like a constant ache in our lives. The note, now slick with my own anxious sweat, was my proof, my terrible burden, and my weapon. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep into my bones, that I could not wait for my son, Razvan, to emerge from the blinding light of his misplaced love. I had to move, and I had to move now. Tiran pulled back slightly, his eyes, Mirella's eyes, pleading with me. "Grandma, we have to go, please." His whisper was raw, a tiny, wounded sound that cut through my paralysis. I simply nodded, the gesture feeling heavy and grave. Across the table, Eliza, my adopted daughter, our rock, watched me. Her calm, deep-set gaze registered the catastrophic change in my face. We had always possessed a quiet language, a silent, maternal wavelength. I gave her the slightest shake of my head, danger, and then mouthed 2 words that carried the full, terrifying weight of the moment. "Watch him." Eliza didn't need further explanation. She was already moving, seamlessly drawing Tiran close, her hand resting on his back with a pressure that was both comforting and fiercely protective. She became the stillness in the storm, the anchor I needed to let me drift away and fight. The maitre d's amplified voice cut through the air, cheerful and oblivious, announcing the imminent serving of the main course. Time was up. I stood up, the legs of my chair screeching against the polished floor, a harsh, aggressive sound that finally drew the attention of the distant, oblivious guests. I didn't care. I marched, not run, but walked with a terrifying, deliberate calm, straight toward the double stainless steel doors of the service kitchen. Every step was a conscious effort, a harnessing of a primal, guttural rage. The festive colors of the room were a blur. All I saw was my path. I glanced once at Razvan, standing near the head table, his face alight with laughter as he toasted a client. He was so tragically, beautifully blind. He wouldn't be able to help us right now. He was trapped inside his own beautiful lie. This was my fight. I slammed through the kitchen door, the noise echoing off the metal surfaces, the sudden shift from soft jazz to the cacophony of clanking plates and angry steam, a shocking sensory assault. A young waiter, his name tag reading Davin, jumped, his tray of polished cutlery nearly tumbling. I didn't ask. I demanded. I shoved the crumpled note onto the nearest counter, my voice low and shaking with controlled fury. Who gave you this? The one for table 8, for the child's plate? Tell me who wrote it. Davin's face instantly went white, his terror palpable. He stammered, his eyes darting wildly. Ma'am, I don't know her name. She was just a guest. Said it was an allergy note for the chef. I think she had a long red dress. She was standing near the main fountain just a moment ago. His voice broke on the final words, his accidental dropping of the note now a monumental act of unintended heroism. A long red dress. The description was a whisper, but it detonated a bomb in my mind. Verena, Lizzie's shy, quiet sister. I had noticed her earlier, dressed in a strikingly aggressive shade of scarlet, moving with a slight, almost imperceptible drag in her walk. A small, hidden injury I remembered. Lizzie wouldn't risk her perfect hands, but she would easily use her sister as a clean operative. The pieces locked together with a sickening final click. I spun on my heel, leaving the terrified waiter behind, the metallic scent of the kitchen suddenly tasting like iron in my mouth. I had the truth. Now I would deliver the blow. The transition from the hot, smelling chaos of the kitchen back into the elegant ballroom was jarring, a descent from reality into a dangerous theater. The music seemed to swell again, a defiant, false crescendo. I spotted Verena almost instantly, the flash of that aggressive dark red dress near the fountain. She was laughing, a brittle, high-pitched sound, trying desperately to blend in. I marched, closing the distance, my focus a terrifying, single-minded tunnel. I didn't wait for Razvan. He was still caught in the polite web of his guests. I stopped directly in front of Verena, my shadow falling over her, the sudden cessation of my movement drawing a tight circle of immediate silence around us. Verena, I spoke her name, the sound low, cold, and utterly authoritative. She flinched, her brittle laugh dying instantly. Her eyes, wide and terrified, flew to her sister, Lizzie, who was just 2 feet away. Lizzie was still posing, radiating perfect, untouchable happiness, but she must have sensed the shift in the temperature because her own smile tightened, her head turning slowly, like a serpent sensing danger. I didn't raise my voice. I simply held up the note, the wrinkled paper now a symbol of judgment. My grandson has a severe shrimp allergy. This note, instructing the kitchen to put shrimp in his food, came from you. My words were a hammer blow, clear and simple, delivered not as a question, but as a statement of fact. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, the reaction exploded. Not from me, but from the women themselves. Verena burst into immediate, high-pitched sobs, her carefully constructed composure dissolving into panic. No, I didn't know. I swear, Lizzie said it was an order change for her father, a substitute. I didn't read it. She just asked me to pass it. Her confession, delivered in a desperate pleading wail, was the complete unraveling of the conspiracy. It was the frightened cry of a pawn throwing her queen to the wolves. Lizzie's reaction was volcanic. The beautiful mask shattered, replaced by a momentary flash of pure, unadulterated hatred. She whirled on her sister, a hand raised, her voice a dangerous, frantic hiss. "Shut up, you idiot! You stupid, lying girl!" Her elegant appearance was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. It was a terrifying, beautiful moment of truth. Razvan, finally pulled from his conversation by the commotion, arrived, his face transitioning from confusion to horror as he took in the scene. His bride screaming at her sister, the crying girl, and me, his mother holding the poisonous evidence. What is happening here?" he stammered, lost and devastated. Eliza, our quiet anchor, arrived at my side, Tiran shielded behind her. Her voice was cool, steady, and sharp, a surgeon's instrument. "What's happening, Razvan? Is that your bride attempted to harm your son on your wedding day? And if you need further proof, the hotel security cameras will show your sister-in-law passing the note into the kitchen." The mention of the cameras was the final, devastating blow. Lizzie froze, her face turning an ashen, sickly gray. She didn't deny the accusation again. Her silence, a heavy, profound emptiness, was the clearest confession of all. I watched Razvan's world, his desperate, beautiful lie, implode in his eyes. He looked at the trembling Tiran, then back at his bride, and the light in him simply went out. Razvan stood motionless, his gaze traveling the short distance between the terrified Tiran and the defeated, gasping Lizzie. The wedding was over. The music had stopped, and the stunned guests were frozen witnesses to his catastrophe. His face was a roadmap of devastating realization, the shame of his blindness, the terror of his son's near harm, and the sickening betrayal by the woman he had chosen to replace Tiran's mother. I saw the struggle in his eyes, the desperate fading hope that this was all a terrible, misunderstood joke. But a man trying to talk himself out of a nightmare can only do so for so long when the nightmare is standing right in front of him, sobbing in a ridiculously expensive gown. He walked toward Lizzie, his steps heavy, like a man wading through concrete. He didn't touch her. He simply looked at her, and the revulsion, the cold, profound end of his love, was a palpable force. "Get out," he finally said, his voice a low, raw whisper that nonetheless carried the weight of a final, unappealable verdict. "Get out of my son's life, and get out of this place." He turned, his back to her, leaving her utterly alone in her shimmering prison of silk and beads. The hotel security, finally alerted to the chaos, moved in, quietly escorting the weeping, broken bride and her terrified sister from the ballroom. I felt no triumph, only a deep, weary ache in my soul. The danger was averted, but the wound in our family was deep, raw, and bleeding. I led Razvan back to our table, pulling him into a chair. He sank into the velvet seat, burying his head in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, devastating sobs. My heart ached for him. He was a good man, a deeply wounded one, who had mistaken the dazzling light of a superficial attraction for the enduring warmth of true love. He had been so lost in his grief for Mirella, so desperate to fill the void, that he had fallen for the predator who sought to use his family as her stepping stone. I sat beside him, saying nothing. He needed to feel this guilt, this pain, the full weight of the truth. It was the only way he could ever truly begin to heal. Eliza, still holding Tiran, sat across from us. She was the picture of quiet, unshakable strength. She had the deep-set eyes and strong jaw of a woman who knew where her loyalties lay. She had always been our steadfast anchor, but now her innate goodness shone with a fierce, protective light. She caught my eye, and in her silent gaze, I saw the shared relief, the shared resolve, and the deep, enduring love that transcended titles. She was the true sister, the true protector, the woman whose quiet devotion had saved us all from the catastrophe Razvan's blindness had invited. I closed my eyes, and the opulent ballroom faded, replaced by the memory of the past, the slow, insidious growth of the darkness. I recalled the early days of Lizzie's courtship, her polished veneer, her carefully rehearsed compliments. I remembered my initial unease, a mother's instinct, a cold knot in my gut that warned me something was deeply off. Tiran had seen it first, recoiling from her chocolate gift, retreating into himself whenever she entered the room. The children of trauma are rarely fooled. I had voiced my concerns, gently, tentatively, only to be dismissed by a son desperate for the illusion of a clean slate. "She's just not used to kids, Mom. You're overthinking it." He had chosen the beautiful distraction over the uncomfortable truth. Now, the cost of his blindness was the complete collapse of his world, right on the day he hoped to rebuild it. The healing had to begin, not with forgiveness, but with a full, honest acknowledgement of his devastating mistake. The days following the wedding were a blur of hushed conversations, returned gifts, and the heavy silence of a family in shock. We returned to my home in Sacramento, leaving the Florida glitz behind like a cursed memory. Razvan was a shell of a man, consumed by a terrible, paralyzing guilt. He moved slowly, his usual vibrancy completely extinguished. He avoided eye contact, especially with Tiran, who had retreated slightly, his clear eyes filled with a quiet, watchful anxiety. Razvan's silence was the echo of his failure as a father and a protector. He was utterly broken. The quiet redemption, the slow, organic return to life, was orchestrated by Eliza. She didn't press, didn't demand, didn't even mention the wedding. She simply was. She was the steady hearth around which the fragments of our family began to reassemble. She'd wake early, preparing Tiran's favorite breakfast, the smell of cinnamon and sugar, an act of defiance against the lingering smell of betrayal. She carefully packed his lunch, writing him tiny, encouraging notes. Aunt Eliza secrets, Tiran called them, tucking them next to his perfectly cut fruit. She was rebuilding his sense of safety, one small, unwavering act of love at a time. I watched her with a profound, aching love. Eliza, my adopted daughter, who had grown up alongside Razvan, who had always loved him with a quiet, fierce devotion I had long sensed, but never acknowledged. She was a woman of substance, of quiet courage, whose love wasn't a performance, but a deeply rooted commitment. I remembered the subtle, pained look in her eyes during the dinner when Lizzie had first taken Razvan's hand under the table, the sisterly mask barely concealing a deeper longing. Now, that longing was eclipsed by her duty to protect Tiran, and in that duty, her true light was shining brighter than any diamond. One feverish night, Tiran woke up whimpering, burning with a high temperature. I rushed to him, but Eliza was already there, a damp cloth cooling his forehead. She sat by his bedside, not speaking, just stroking his hair, her presence a silent, powerful balm. Razvan, drawn from his room by the small, frightened sounds, stood silently in the doorway, watching them. The scene was simple, profound, and utterly devastating to him. He was seeing the true meaning of partnership, not the dazzling facade of the society bride, but the humble, constant commitment of the woman who would sit through the night, telling Tiran quiet stories about a brave sparrow flying through a storm. Razvan's gaze, when it settled on Eliza, was no longer merely grateful. It was reverent. He saw the true strength, the genuine, self-effacing love he had carelessly overlooked for years. He saw his salvation. He was realizing that the love he had so tragically sought in the blinding light was the quiet, enduring flame that had been warming his home all along. The pain of the wedding had stripped him bare, clearing away the illusion so he could finally see the truth. That night, standing in the shadow of the doorway, Razvan began his slow, difficult journey back to the heart of his home. The atmosphere in the house shifted after that night, becoming charged with an unspoken, powerful tension. Razvan began to seek out Eliza, not for dramatic confessions, but for simple, sustained proximity. They started talking again, really talking, about their shared childhoods, about Morella's memory, and always about Tiran. It was a courtship built on the bedrock of shared history, mutual grief, and the unifying force of Tiran's safety. There were no flashy dates, no expensive gifts, only the slow, meticulous process of two souls recognizing their long-delayed destiny. I stayed out of their way, offering only the slightest of nudges, knowing that true love, like true healing, must happen organically. I focused on small domestic tasks, listening to the soft, easy rhythm of their voices in the next room. Razvan's shame over his past choices was slowly giving way to a nascent, humble determination to be worthy of Eliza's genuine heart. He was rediscovering the man he was before the grief swallowed him whole, a man who valued loyalty and quiet strength over superficial glamour. One afternoon, I found Razvan in the garage, meticulously sanding down the small wooden rocking horse Tiran had outgrown. It was an act of penance, a physical attempt to mend the things he had neglected. I walked in, the scent of wood dust sharp in the air. "She loved this rocker," I said softly, referring to Morella. "She used to say it was the one thing Tiran wouldn't break." He stopped sanding, his hand resting on the smooth wood. "I let go of a lot of things, Mom," he confessed, his voice low and heavy. "The house, the memories, Tiran's needs, and Eliza. I put her on a shelf because the sister title made it safe. I looked for fireworks when I needed a steady light. The failure was mine. I put him in danger because I was running from the pain." He looked at me, a profound humility in his eyes. I confused a distraction with salvation. His self-recrimination was raw, honest, and utterly necessary. "The distraction tried to severely harm your son, Razvan," I stated, my voice firm but kind. "But the light was the woman who walked into a room full of screaming rage to protect him. Don't seek salvation, son. Just accept the truth of the love that has always been here." He nodded, his gaze softening as he looked toward the kitchen window, where Eliza was quietly sorting Tiran's school books. He was looking at his future, finally accepting his heart's true compass point. It was Tiran, however, with the unburdened clarity of a child who finally gave voice to the truth we all knew. We were gathered for a simple, comforting dinner, my cheesy pasta, the ultimate antidote to sorrow. The atmosphere was quiet, almost peaceful. Tiran looked up from his plate, his eyes clear and focused on Eliza. "I want Aunt Eliza to be my mommy," he announced, his small voice cutting through the silence with the weight of a decree. The sound of a spoon hitting the floor was the only response. Eliza froze, her face flushed with a mixture of shock and profound, unexpected joy. Razvan's eyes immediately welled up. The child's decree was the final, undeniable validation, the simple, powerful truth that finally set us all free. The immediate aftermath of Tiran's declaration was a beautiful, tender embarrassment. Eliza, her face flushed with emotion, retreated slightly, her humility preventing her from basking in the raw affection. Razvan, galvanized by his son's simple, direct request, finally shed the last layers of his guilt. He realized the path forward wasn't just about protection. It was about commitment. He was done with illusions, done with grand gestures. This time, his action had to be honest, simple, and rooted in the deep-seated respect he had for the woman who had saved his family. He came to me in the backyard, where I was tending my roses, the warm Sacramento air thick with their scent. "I'm going to ask her, Mom," he said, his voice husky with a new, quiet determination. "Not in a ballroom, not with cameras, just at home, where we belong." I smiled, pruning a dead rose stem with a sharp snap of the shears. Good, no more fireworks, Razvan. Only truth. I knew his intention was to honor her, but also to honor the past. He chose a piece of jewelry that held more weight than any diamond. Mirella's simple silver locket, engraved with a tiny swirling M. He had kept it in a small velvet box, a piece of the past he hadn't been able to let go of. This wasn't about replacing the memory of his first wife. It was about entrusting the memory, the legacy, and the protection of his son to the only woman worthy of it. It was the ultimate statement of trust and continuity. That evening, Tiran was their unwitting accomplice, sent to bed early with a plea for Eliza to fetch his favorite lost storybook from the living room. Razvan waited, standing by the soft light of the reading lamp, holding the small velvet box. When Eliza walked in, her arms still full of the mundane clutter of our life, a forgotten toy, a discarded blanket, she stopped, surprised by the sudden, expectant silence. Razvan walked toward her, taking her hands in his gaze steady, sincere, and utterly devoid of the desperate insecurity that had marked his last proposal. Eliza, he began, his voice rough with emotion, you didn't just save my son's life that day. You saved my soul. You are the truest thing Tiran and I have ever known. I don't want a new life. I just want the true one we already have, made official. He opened the box, revealing the silver locket. This was Mirella's. I want you to wear it. Be his mother. Be my partner. Be our family forever. Eliza's reaction was profound. Tears didn't just well up. They flowed, an immediate, unburdening stream of release. It was the moment she stopped being the selfless sister and finally allowed herself to be loved completely, without reserve or guilt. She didn't look at the locket's value. She looked at its meaning. She saw the full weight of the family's legacy being entrusted to her care. Yes, Razvan, she whispered, the word thick with decades of silent love and loyalty. Yes, forever. Their embrace was a quiet, enduring promise, the simple, honest truth that finally brought peace back to our house. The subsequent wedding was a study in honest, profound anticlimax. It wasn't about the show. It was about the sanctity of the bond. It was held 3 months later in our own backyard, beneath the sprawling, ancient oak tree that had watched Razvan and Eliza grow up together. The guest list was small, only the truly loyal, the ones who had witnessed the shame and the eventual salvation. There were no rented silks or towering champagne fountains, just the scent of cut grass, the warm, honest light of a late summer evening, and the quiet joy of a family finally made whole. Eliza was beautiful in a simple cream-colored dress, unadorned, the only jewelry the silver locket resting on her collarbone catching the golden light. It was a tangible symbol of her strength, a woman who wasn't afraid to stand in the light of the past while walking confidently into the future. Tiran, now beaming with a secure, unshakable joy, walked between them, his hand holding both of theirs. He was the reason for the celebration, the center of the orbit, the precious life that had been protected and anchored. Razvan looked at his bride with a deep, humble reverence. This time, the vows were simple, heartfelt promises of partnership, loyalty, and above all, protection. He promised to never be blind again, to always choose the truth over the illusion, and to cherish the quiet, steady strength of the woman standing before him. It was the final, public act of his redemption, the moment he publicly honored the true cost of love. As the setting sun cast long, warm shadows across the lawn, I watched them exchange rings. Tears flowed, but they were tears of deep, aching relief and gratitude, not of sorrow. The entire atmosphere was a powerful testament to the fact that trauma, when faced with courage, can forge the strongest kind of love. The memory of the disastrous Florida wedding was not erased, but it was neutralized. Its darkness had served only to highlight the brilliance of this real, profound connection. Later, at the simple backyard reception, I watched Eliza sit on the grass, helping Tiran cut his piece of the small, simple cake. She was already, in every way that truly mattered, his mother. Razvan sat beside them, his hand resting on Eliza's shoulder, his eyes fixed entirely on his son. He was home. I walked up to them, my heart overflowing. "It's a beautiful thing," I murmured, resting my hand on Razvan's back. He looked up, his eyes shining. "It's the only thing that's real, Mom. The only thing." And in that simple admission, I knew the greatest revenge against Lizzie's malice had been achieved. The unassailable, humble happiness of the family she tried to destroy. The years that followed were not without the typical ups and downs of a real family, but they were grounded by an unshakable core. Tiran, buoyed by the stability and the absolute sincerity of Eliza's love, thrived. He was no longer the watchful, anxious child, but a confident, compassionate young man, his quiet strength clearly inherited from Eliza. The scar of the wedding, the initial fear and betrayal, had taught him the profound importance of seeing people clearly. Eliza's role transcended the title of stepmother. She was his confidant, his teacher, the gentle yet firm guide who navigated his teenage years. I would watch them in their easy, organic intimacy, knowing that Razvan had finally chosen a partner who amplified his strengths and loved his son unconditionally. Their life together was a rejection of the superficiality that had once almost destroyed them. They chose simple pleasures, hikes in the Sierra Nevada foothills, quiet evenings reading, family trips to the California coast, over the flashy, attention-seeking lifestyle that Lizzie had personified. Razvan, having faced his own failure and shame, was a man redeemed. He had become a truly present father and a deeply devoted husband. His love for Eliza was quiet, constant, and expressed through a million small, supportive actions. The trauma had stripped away his ego, leaving a man who was humble, grateful, and fiercely protective of the true blessings in his life. He often told me, "I have to earn this life, Mom, every single day." And he did. I, in turn, found my own profound peace. My life was no longer defined by worry or the need for constant vigilance. I could simply be Betty, the grandmother, the mother, the keeper of the family's history and its future. The fear I had felt under that wedding table had been replaced by a quiet, deep-seated confidence in the strength of my family's core. We were not perfect, but we were real. The scars of the near tragedy remained, the memory a constant, quiet reminder, but they were now badges of survival. We had all learned a terrible, vital lesson, that courage is not about fighting the loud battles, but about showing up for the quiet, constant responsibility of love and protection. The story of the wedding was now a family legend, a dark chapter that explained the depth of their commitment and the absolute importance of choosing substance over facade. Years passed, wrapping our family in a protective layer of love and time, but the past has a way of returning, not to inflict new pain, but to offer a final, somber closure. One quiet afternoon, while I was preparing my favorite San Francisco-style clam chowder, my sister-in-law, Livia, called. Her voice was low, heavy with a grim sense of finality. "Betty, they found her. Lizzie." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The name, which had been banished from our house for years, hung in the air like a curse. Livia explained that Lizzie, unable to recover from the public shame of the failed wedding, had plummeted. Her aggressive ambition and ruthlessness, which she had once used to climb the corporate ladder, had turned inward. She was involved in a massive, multi-million-dollar financial fraud, her desperate need for opulence and control finally consuming her. I turned on the television. There she was, no longer the dazzling bride, but a defeated, hollow-eyed woman in a sterile police photograph. The beautiful, terrifying mask was gone, replaced by the stark, undeniable image of her true emptiness. The illusion was dead. The news anchor spoke of her arrest, the stolen millions, and the long prison sentence she now faced. It was a complete, final destruction of the life she had been so determined to seize through malice. I felt no flicker of triumph, no surge of victorious revenge. The years of deep, authentic happiness with my family had rendered that emotion meaningless. Her downfall was not my victory. It was simply the natural gravity of her own deceit, the predictable trajectory of a life built entirely on lies. My true victory had been achieved years ago, in the small, profound yes of a woman who chose love and family over ego and ambition. When Razvan came home, I told him the news simply. He listened, his expression thoughtful. Not angry, but deeply settled. "She was always a parasite, Mom," he said, finally breaking the silence. "She was always looking for something outside of herself to fill a void. She got what she earned." He walked into the kitchen, where Eliza and Tyrion were quietly studying. He embraced his wife, kissed his son, and joined the simple, warm reality of his life. The shadow of the past was rejected, unable to penetrate the thick, loving walls of our home. Her price had been paid, and our family was finally and completely free of her haunting influence. The news of Lizzie's final undoing provided a quiet, absolute sense of closure. There were no loose threads, no what-ifs left to haunt us. Her story served as a permanent marker for Razvan, a stark, unforgettable reminder of the abyss he had skirted. But for the rest of us, it was merely an outside event, a distant thunder that had no power over our clear skies. Tyrion, now a wise, observant teenager, understood the story in a way he couldn't as a child. He was old enough to grasp the gravity of the betrayal and the magnitude of Eliza's courage. His trust in her wasn't a child's reliance. It was a young man's profound respect. He understood that love isn't something inherited. It's something earned through action and sacrifice. I often watched Tyrion and Eliza interact. They had a shared, quiet sense of humor and an unspoken understanding that spoke volumes. One afternoon, I saw him approach her in the living room where she was grading papers. He didn't ask for money or a favor. He simply leaned down, kissed the top of her head, and murmured, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." The casual simplicity of the gesture, the natural way he used the word, was a symphony to my heart. Eliza's humility never faded. She still viewed her role as a blessing, not a right. She often spoke of Mirella to Tyrion, ensuring her memory was a warm, accepted part of their family history, not a ghost to be feared. This generosity of spirit, this profound security in her own place, was the ultimate display of her true strength, a quality that had been utterly absent in Lizzie. Razvan's love for Eliza had deepened into an immovable force. Their partnership was a quiet masterclass in mutual support and appreciation. He never stopped being grateful, never stopped recognizing the immense gift she was. He had learned that the highest form of love is the quiet, constant commitment to protect the ones who are vulnerable. He had been given a second chance, and he never wasted a single moment of it. The scars of the past had truly mended, leaving behind not bitterness, but a profound clarity. We had learned that the most dangerous battles are not fought with loud weapons, but in the quiet choices made behind closed doors. We had all emerged from the fire with a deeper understanding of what it means to be a family, a sanctuary built on honesty and defended by unwavering love. The family tree project Tiran brought home felt like the perfect catalyst for a final, necessary talk. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, when he finally approached me about it. Tiran, now 13, spread the large sheet of butcher paper across my dining table. He was tracing the lines of our family history, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had the branches of Razvan and Mirella, and then the line that connected him to Eliza. He looked up, holding the pencil steady, his eyes full of the kind of intelligent curiosity that seeks emotional truth over simple fact. "Grandma," he began, his voice serious, "I know Mom Eliza is my stepmother, but she feels like the real one. Dad told me she was a gift for us. I want to know what the real story is. Why did he give her the silver locket?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of his entire childhood. It was time for him to fully understand the story of his protection. I sat down, my hand gently resting on his arm. I told him about the locket, that it was Mirella's, a symbol of trust. Then I told him the full truth of the wedding, not as a sensational drama, but as a quiet, vital act of courage. I described the note, the terror, the moment Eliza stepped forward, demanding the security footage, her voice cold and steady. I didn't embellish Lizzie's cruelty. I simply laid out the truth of her intent to severely harm him through his allergy. "A terrible woman tried to use your father's grief to hurt you, Tiran," I said, my voice low. "But your mother, Eliza, chose to fight. She didn't fight for a title or a dress. She fought for your life. Your father gave her that locket because he recognized that she was the only one capable of carrying Mirella's love forward, a love built on absolute fierce protection. She is the true keeper of our family's security." Tiran listened, his eyes unblinking, absorbing the story of his own vulnerability and his mother's profound strength. When I was finished, he didn't look sad or angry. He simply looked down at the family tree and drew a small, thick circle around Eliza's name. "She always knew where home was," he stated, a deep, knowing insight that validated every painful choice we had made. The telling of the truth was the final stage of his healing, transforming a childhood trauma into a foundational story of his mother's heroism. The chapter of chaos was closed, the book of healing was written, but the story of commitment was ongoing. Our family's strength was no longer a matter of faith, it was a matter of proven fact. We had faced the darkness, and we had chosen the light, not once, but every single day since that disastrous wedding. Mirella's memory remained a warm, quiet presence. On the anniversary of her passing, we kept our tradition, driving to the California coast. This year, the ritual was filled with a deep, peaceful relief. We stood on the bluff overlooking the Pacific, the immense, powerful ocean, a symbol of the depth of our survival. Tiran wrote his message on the small card attached to the white balloon. Razvan read the words aloud, his voice steady. "Dear Mom Mirella, I am safe and happy. Thank you for the stars. Mom Eliza keeps us home. Love, Tiran." The words were an affirmation of the new peace, a perfect, quiet acceptance of the mother who was and the mother who is. I watched the balloon ascend, catching a high, sure current, carrying the message toward the vast, blue sky. I looked at my family, Razvan, his arm around Eliza, both of them holding their son. They were a portrait of quiet, enduring happiness, forged not in luxury, but in the white-hot crucible of betrayal and survival. I placed my hand on Razvan's shoulder, my heart overflowing with a final, profound sense of gratitude. "You made the right choice, son," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You chose the protector. You chose the truth." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the ascending balloon. "She didn't just save Tehran, Mom. She saved me from a life of emptiness. We will never be blind again." The true meaning of family, I realized, is not about the absence of storms, but the certainty of the anchor. We had learned that you must listen to your heart, trust the quiet instincts, and recognize that the most powerful form of love is the courage to protect the vulnerable. The wedding was a failure, but the family, the enduring commitment of two hearts and the safety of one boy, was an absolute, unending triumph. Our story of a mother's fight and a family's redemption is complete. Which was the most powerful lesson learned? Razvan's redemption, Eliza's courage, or Tehran's honesty? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.